Today I'm with KrIstal DeSantis. Is that pronounced correct, KrIstal?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Welcome to the show, KrIstal.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's my pleasure. Can you tell people a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. So I am in Austin, Texas, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also am an author. I wrote a book last year that just came out last year. Um, so that's what I do for work. As a person, I enjoy cooking and eating and traveling. Um, and I am married, and me and my husband, we have three children that have four legs. We have three animal kids, and then he has a child, and so I'm a bonus parent. So that's kind of the constellation of my life right now.
Cool. How is Austin, Texas?
Right now in this moment is ACL is going on, so it's very vibrant right now. So ACL, the big music festival, got a lot of people coming in for this. So it's a very exciting time in Austin. A lot of stuff happening.
That's great. Is it a good place to live? I hear a lot of good things about Texas.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is very hot. I mean, it's October, and I'm in sleepless. Like it was 90 degrees yesterday, so it's still pretty warm. Um, so if you don't mind the heat, it's not a bad place to be.
It's got to be better than the UK. It's just dark and wet and miserable here all the time.
There's something to be said for balance. Maybe everyone just needs to migrate in the winters and take a take a page out of the bird's book.
Yeah, definitely. That'll suit me. Need need some of that sunshine in my life, and then I don't have to take so much vitamin D tablets.
All right. Yeah.
So obviously your expertise, KrIstal, is in sort of relationships mostly.
hmm
So what kind of work are you doing at the minute?
So right now, I I work with either people who are trying to figure out their own relationship with themselves and maybe with dating. And so those are kind of my individual clients. And then I also work with couples who are, and maybe at some point in their relationship where they need a little bit more support, or they're just looking to enhance their relationship, right? Maybe they have a lot of stuff going for them, but they just feel like they could be more connected. They could have better communication. So that's really the population that I have in my office right now, either people who have experienced trauma or who want to kind of heal their relationship with themselves, who are trying to make new relationships. They're in dating and they're trying to, navigate what it's like to form a relationship in this day and age, or people that are in long-term relationships, who are trying to kind of just get themselves back on track.
Yeah, it can be difficult relationships, right? And we all go
Yeah,
through phases, ups and downs, and it
absolutely.
can be difficult. You said something about sort of the modern day, really, how to cope in this kind of modern day era and environment. What's
hmm
kind of one thing about modern society that approaches love and relationships? What would you change? So, that what kind of things do you see regularly that you would change?
So, I mean, there's a lot, and actually, right now we're in a very interesting time. I think just as a society, and I say that like really broadly, in that back in the day, maybe a couple generations ago, being in a relationship was something that you just kind of had to do in order to exist in a society. And I'm talking specifically about like a marriage or a partnered relationship, right? We're all in relationships of one kind or another, family relationships, all of that. But it was kind of expected that at some point you find a husband, you find a wife, you get married, you have kids, you kind of, follow the script. Um, and right now, I think we're just in a really interesting place as a society in the modern world, all over the world, where that script is not necessarily written in stone anymore. And people are trying to figure out, like, is marriage part of my future, what I see for myself? Are children really something I want to kind of invest in and do that path or not. And I think it's really the first time in history where people actually have the choice. And we don't quite know what that looks like yet. So
Yeah, I worry what that looks like in kind of older age when when we're done with our partying phase or enjoying our life and our career come to an end, and then what are we left with at that stage? That's what I worry about.
yeah, but I think that's really where this is, where a lot of people are at, right? Because in the past, people relied on the relationships because of the obligation of the structure, right? So like if you were a child, even if your parents didn't treat you right, like you had an obligation to take care of them in their older age, right? Um, but now it's kind of like what you said of like, sure, we want to have relationships that last us throughout our lives, but I think the realization is now you actually have to be invested in them. They don't just stay there because they have to anymore. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And I think, society's shifted as well, hasn't it, over the past sort of, I don't know, probably like 100 years, I suppose. But,
Yeah.
as time's gone on and on, women have become more and more independent, whereas they always used to be the one that held that family together, really. They were always that
Hmm.
linchpin, holding
Yeah.
that family together. And I think now that women are more successful, more out in the workplace,
Hmm.
more career orientated, that's kind of
Hmm.
shifted that dynamic a bit. And I don't think everybody's quite adjusted to get that balance right yet.
Totally.
Because
Yeah.
especially the men, I suppose, because we are useless. We need pointing in the right direction all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think I want to give credit to both sides, right? Is that it's I think what's like you said, what has happened is a lot of the times it was women that were keeping these relationships together, and then women started to realize like how much work that is. And so they're much more careful about choosing to put themselves in those positions now. And so nobody's taking those positions, right? So in an ideal world, right, in the future, it would be that everybody who's invested in the relationship can hold it together or play their own role in holding it together, right? Like, yes, mom calls the kids, but so does dad. And then the kids call their parents. It's not just the parents call the kids, right? And so I think we're at that new kind of era of like figuring out what does it actually mean to be in relationship with people and what does it actually take to keep relationships together over a lifespan where people aren't just living in the same 5 mile radius, they go to the same church, they go to the same school, and you have a relationship because there they are, they're not going anywhere. And so the challenge of the modern relationship, not just the romantic one, but in so many other ways, friendships, parent-child relationships, is how do we all be invested in holding something together where in the past we relied on external circumstances or the one person, mom was the glue of or grandma was the glue of the family. And instead, how can we make it a shared endeavor and a shared investment? And that's really hard, as anybody who's ever worked on a group project can tell you. Like, figuring out like, wait, whose job is that? And why am I more invested than that person? And figuring out all of those dynamics is a lot more challenging than just they'll delegate that person and they take care of it, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's the balance that we need to find as well, because life isn't linear. So sometimes the man, for instance, might have to pick up the slack, and then other
Yeah.
times the woman might have to pick up the slack. Or obviously, if it's a same sex marriage, well, the other partner. But it's about finding that balance, and like if somebody is going through a difficult time and in a difficult place, then the other one picks up the slack, and vice versa,
Mhm.
to try and find that
Mhm.
balance to keep moving forward. Really.
Yeah. And that's where it's challenging because it requires two people to have almost the same capacity for this, the same skill in relationships, right? Is that like, yeah, if I'm not feeling well and I ask you to pick up the slack, but then you don't know how to do it, then there's no equality, right? And so I think that's where a lot of modern relationships are being challenged of like, wait, how do we divide all of this? How do we show up as equal? Um, if, yeah, if the traditional way of kind of, you stay in your lane, I stay in mine, I will never ask you to pick up my slack because that's my job. And like you will never ask me to pick up your slack because that's your job, which is a lot of how traditional relationships worked, right? It was like, you know, you know, maybe just being really broad and stereotypic, but like, there are some relationships where like grandpa would never have been asked to change a diaper. Like, what? No, he, does the man stuff. He goes out and make a paycheck. And, grandpa would never ask grandma to get a job. Like, no, she stays home, And so I think that's really what the challenge is now, is like everybody has to kind of do everything. And it's a lot. It's a lot to be an adult and have a life and have a relationship and raise children. It's a lot.
Defo, life is hard, man. Life is hard.
Yeah.
So, what's a common piece of relationship advice that you actually disagree with?
Ooh. Okay. Well, it's easy. That's an easy one. The happy wife, happy life one. I actually put that in the prologue of my book as like, it's one of the worst myths. Because again, it really goes on that old model of like, it's, you know, uh, first of all, underlying that is like the man's needs doesn't matter, right? It's like if your wife's happy, you should be happy, suck it up. Like, that's how it is. Happy wife, happy life. So I really don't like that one. Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, that's a fair one. I still hear that a lot.
Mhm. Which the reason I don't like it so much is because it doesn't actually work. You know, it's like I think maybe there's a there's a which like so many things, right? When they get distilled down into a soundbite, sometimes it loses the the nuance, right? It's like, of course you want your wife to be happy. Great. But what about your happiness, right? But then if it was like, you know, I don't know, just being able to say like yes and yes, having a happy wife is a good thing and your happiness matters, right?
Yeah, I think that's the problem, and I think the internet doesn't help because all these sound bites or like
Oh
extreme
yeah.
views get
Yeah.
they get more airtime. People pay more attention to them because it polarizes people. But
Hmm.
usually the answer's somewhere in the middle, and there's balance to everything. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
But if somebody's setting out in a relationship now, then so if they're early stages of a relationship, what do you think would best set them up for long-term success?
Um, so I I mean, self-awareness, that's number one, is, knowing what makes you happy, knowing what you're looking for, knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your challenges are, knowing just who you are is the number one thing that leads to long-term success in relationships. Because when you know who you are, you can be honest about like what you need in order to function and thrive in a relationship, right? As so many people, when they're dating, especially with these apps and these online things, it's about presenting an idealized version of yourself. And I think I see a lot of people, they try really hard to be that idealized version, but it's you, unless it's hard to keep that up over time, right? Unless you're really actually making the changes to be that person. Um, and so that like being self-aware enough to say, you know what, I might not be the idealized version of myself now, but I would like to find a partner who's okay with the version of me that is right now, with the knowledge that I am constantly striving to better myself. And they will support that, and they will be generous and kind and allow for my humanity. I'm not, the perfect person, the perfect version of me, but it's okay because I'm self-aware and I'm open to accepting their humanity as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Ultimately, it's about that willingness to be vulnerable, isn't it? That's how we build true, deep relationships. Because when we pretend that we're perfect and we hide all these things and we, wear this
Mhm.
mask to make out like we're something we're not, then there's a cost to that, and that cost
Mhm.
is that deeper, meaningful relationship because you're hiding, who you are really.
Yeah, which, again, there's a deeper conversation here about like how men have been socialized to present themselves as very competent and capable, right? I know we've heard these kind of stereotypic jokes of like, the man who doesn't want to ask for directions because he doesn't want to appear that he doesn't know what he's doing, or he's like, I got that, I'll fix the sink. And, you're like, you're not a plumber, just call a plumber, like, But again, that acknowledging that pressure that a lot of men have felt for a very long time to, like, if you don't know the answer, at least pretend like you do. Or like, this is something that's like masculine, that you're the guy that, is very competent. I got it. I can do it. Yeah, I know that. I know that. And there's a vulnerability involved in saying, like, I don't know how to do that. Or, yeah, maybe I do need some help. Which, it, again, there's a lot of women that haven't quite gotten around to the idea that, oh, yeah, men are people. And, maybe sometimes a man it is vulnerable, and it's okay, and it's safe to be vulnerable. So I think we're at this really, again, still interesting place in society where I think we're starting to allow for vulnerability in that way, that you don't have to know everything, you don't have to be everything, but it's still not 100% safe to do that in some relationships. So
Yeah, and I think that's what everybody worries about is about being vulnerable, showing who they truly are, and then being
mhm.
rejected. Because I think that probably that's what they protect themselves from, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a super valid fear. And, again, there's um, a lot of negative consequences for men to start showing vulnerability, um, especially with all of the stigma and all of the historical um, negative consequences that men have received for showing that and for being honest about their vulnerabilities. Yeah, so it's tough.
Yeah, I will say though, it's not just men because I come from a line of very, very stubborn men and women who refuse to
Ah,
ask for help but refuse to show any weakness and will persevere no
sure.
matter what.
Yeah. Which, it is really interesting because it is, I almost think of it sometimes as like when you show, I work with a lot of high functioning people like that, right? So a lot of men, but you're right, some women too. And it's basically, sometimes I talk about it like I have a wall in my office that's a stone wall, and it's like, I don't know if anyone's ever tried to boulder or climb, if anyone's a climber. It's like when there's a smooth wall, there's no points of connection. There's no points to grab onto. And right. And so when people are like smooth and perfect and they never show vulnerability, they're like a granite slab. And it's like it's really difficult to connect with that. Whereas when you're like a little bit rough, a little bit, you know, some cracks are showing, it's like it actually allows the spaces for people to connect and grab hold and find little points of connection. um, yeah, so it's just that kind of like when you're smooth and perfect, you're beautiful, but there's not a lot of room points for connection, whereas the rough and all of that might not be as quote unquote perfect looking, but there's a lot more points for connection.
Yeah, I like that analogy. Reminds me a little bit of karaoke. Whenever you go to karaoke, if the singer's really, really good, you're just like, well, I might as well go to a concert.
Right.
It's fun. It's fun when they're imperfect.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah. It's like we actually have a real soft spot for kind of imperfect things as long as it's, like a safe environment to have that connection in.
Yeah, and the imperfections is what makes people unique as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's the human part of us.
Yeah, and it makes us feel more human as well, I suppose. Because if we've got somebody who's pretending to be or is perfect, then we just feel like we're not worthy or we're not, you know, we don't measure up really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And I've you know, met with and worked with some of those perfect people, and like it's really exhausting to be that perfect all the time because it's not super natural. So you have to work really, really hard to not, because it's not actually being perfect, it's presenting as perfect, right? And so that's like it's a whole production, and it takes a lot of energy, and it's quite exhausting, and it can be very lonely too, right? Because you're very invested in like making sure no one sees behind the curtain, behind the wall. So you can, yeah, it's just, it takes a lot of mental energy to present as perfect. Um, yeah. exhausting.
Yeah, keeping people out is, again, it stops that connection, doesn't it? So it's difficult.
Yeah.
What's the most rewarding part of your job then?
Oh gosh. I mean, getting to see people learn to connect with themselves, right? And then connect with others. So that is just, I mean, at the end of the day, like that's really what humans are wired for, right? We all want to connect. We all want to feel like we belong. We all want, those moments of connection that we feel like we're in flow, or we're like, oh my gosh, like we just feel so seen. Um, and that's kind of like what we're born with. That's our DNA. And then we grow up in a world that punishes us for being human and tells us that, we need to be more perfect, or we need to be better and have higher grades. And like, and so really it's about like uncovering all of the adaptations that people have developed in order to keep them safe in a really sometimes unforgiving world, and really allowing them to kind of come back to their like, oh my gosh, I really am like, I'm a really cool person, and I really like when I connect with myself, who I am, and I can reconnect with what I loved about me when I was a kid. I remember I thought I was going to be an astronaut, and I just was like such a vibrant kid, and now I'm like cynical and think the worst of people, and like all of that. And I just, so allowing people to go back and connect with those kind of core parts of themselves, and then seeing them be able to share that with somebody they love, whether it's a friend, whether it's they call their sibling and they're like, hey bud, haven't, like be able to connect with them in a different way, that's less guarded and more vulnerable, more honest. Or with couples, seeing them be able to connect like from a, not from a protection place of like, you're the enemy, I'm gonna win this one, but instead really kind of showing up and being like, hey, wait a minute, we love each other, right? Like we're on the same side, right? We're ride or die, right? Okay, so then if I'm using that like way of relating to you, I just want to share this with you because you're my person. And that, like watching that change happen from like protection to people that are like protected to then opening up and connecting is like love.
Yeah, that must be amazing being a part of that, doing that work. I've personally been on my own journey trying to kind of free myself really and just be happy in myself and more vulnerable and open and stuff like that. And it is so freeing. It just makes you, so much happier, more childlike almost. You just take more joy out of
Yes.
things.
Hmm. And I don't know if you resonate or you can relate to this, but like the amount of work that you don't realize you're doing until you stop doing it, like, the work of like trying to be a certain way in the world, or trying to present or show up in a certain way, like to be able to have that relief of like, oh, I can just be me. Huh, okay. You just don't almost yeah, just realizing like, oh, I don't have to work so hard. Huh,
Yeah, it's
kind of
amazing.
lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the most courageous thing someone could do for the sake of their relationship?
Oh my gosh. I think honestly, just people even showing up to talk about their relationship in a therapy setting is still a very courageous thing, especially especially with some of the population I work with. I work often with a lot of first responder men and veteran couples, and a lot of that is, there's some maybe stigma around therapy and like mental health, and so even just the courage of saying like, all right, I will walk into a room with a stranger and I will tell my story, and I'll be open to hearing yours, and I'm willing to like maybe look at what I could do to change to make our relationship better. Like just that. And I mean, walking into the first session is really, really courageous for a lot of people. It's just that first step of saying like, maybe I do need, or I could use some help here. Um, and that's huge. Yeah, it's a lot.
Absolutely. I think as well, therapy gets a bad rep. A lot of people will try it, yeah, not just marriage therapy or marriage counseling, anything like that. It's just all therapy gets a bad rep because I think people will go, they won't open up, they'll just go and be shut down. They might not
Yeah.
necessarily connect with the therapist, and then they'll be like, oh, it doesn't work, awful, it doesn't work. They don't give it a chance. They
Yeah,
don't try other people to see if they can build a relationship with the therapist, because ultimately that's a relationship as well, and you need to kind of build that relationship to
absolutely.
make that work. So, do you find you get
Absolutely.
much of that?
Yeah, I really, I definitely, I was thinking, I don't know why, well, maybe because I was just watching it. Do you watch, or have you ever seen the show Love is Blind?
No, I've seen it advertised, but I've never seen it.
Okay. So I guess I don't know. It's kind of like dating, right? Sometimes I talk to people about like dating of like you go, on a first date and you're kind of excited and you're like sharing something about yourself and it doesn't land or you just don't vibe with the other person. Like it can be very discouraging because you put yourself out there, you like worked hard to like get ready and go, and maybe you had a lot of high hopes. So I completely understand how that can feel very like ugh, it's not even like what's the point, right? And sometimes that can feel like that after going to a first therapy session with a therapist who's not a good fit for you. Is that real like disappointment after a first date that didn't turn out to be your person? Um, and so I just like want to validate that like yeah it is very very hard because there is something about the chemistry of like being open and vulnerable but also recognizing that if you go on a first date and you're like here's all my stuff it still also might not feel that great when you leave and it's not a good fit um, so just yeah being able to say both and like I really appreciate the people that come in and if I'm not your person I still really appreciate the fact that you were brave enough to come in and give it a chance and maybe it's then my goal is to help you find that therapist that is your person but eventually it's about like it's kind of like dating you got to find the one for you and sometimes that's tough.
Yeah, it can be tough, and I think people are too quick to give up. And I think I also do think that it's like, and I've used this analogy before. It's like giving up smoking. If you don't want to give
Mm,
up, no matter how many patches you use or what tablets you take, or if you vape as well, whatever you start doing to try and quit, if you don't really want to quit, you won't.
yeah, yeah, and I'm a big fan of don't do things you don't want to do unless you're ready to do them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Are there is there any specific moment in your life that's kind of changed the way that you view relationships or connection?
Ooh. Um, you know, I mean, I think there's a lot of moments. When I met my husband, I think that was a huge um, moment for me, just because up until that point, so I was not always on the path to be a marriage therapist. I was, working in PR, working in a completely different field. And I was trying to date and I was, but I wasn't very vulnerable, let's be honest. I was kind of like, I'm really career focused right now. And, I dated, but it was just like I didn't put a lot of investment into it. I didn't open up a lot. Um, so, no wonder these relationships were fairly shallow. But I met my husband, and suddenly I was like, oh, I actually want a deeper connection, but I don't know how. And so that's really where I think it started to sink in for me that if I want a deeper relationship and a more fulfilling commitment, then I also need to look at my blocks to allowing that to actually happen. And that it's not like magic that when you meet the right person, like boom, fireworks, and suddenly you're going to have all the skills to like be vulnerable and be open. Is I was like, I know this is the one, but I don't know what to do about that, you know? Um, and so that I think was really profound for me and realizing that there would be some work that I would have to do to be ready for that level of vulnerability so that I could have the relationship that I wanted. It wasn't just going to happen by magic. Um, and he couldn't do all the work to just like, you know, make the relationship work if I didn't do my part. So that's when I went to therapy.
Yeah, it's constant work, right? For both parties, and that's it. We've got to try and work together and grow together, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a full-time job.
Absolutely. Is there any belief that you once held about relationships that you've completely changed your mind on?
Let me think. You know, I think just again, like maybe before being a therapist, I thought, I guess the idea that divorce is like the worst thing that could ever happen, um, which it is still very sad, right? And like my job now is like helping couples, prevent and avoid divorce. However, I've seen divorce be a very healthy thing for some couples that maybe were never supposed to be together. They never, like, they just, again, they maybe were following a script and they ended up in a marriage and then they realized, like, either the other person wasn't helping make the marriage work, or, certain things, like the other person was in active addiction or something, that they just weren't showing up. Um, and that actually divorce can be a very, or even if, let's say, there wasn't any like major terrible thing, it's simply that two people can decide that their marriage or their relationship has come to an end, and they can continue to support each other and support a life that allows both of them to thrive in different ways. I think that is something that, it like really it challenged me to think about, like, okay, you know, is a marriage or a relationship ending mean that it was a failure, or is it just a transformation? And of course, there are a lot of factors, and this is not a soundbite, so it's a very complicated, complex, nuanced, event in people's lives. But that is something that I think I've shifted a lot in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And ultimately, sometimes we grow apart, not in just love relationships. In all relationships, sometimes we can
Yeah,
grow apart, or one grows and the other doesn't, and we can go in separate directions, and that happens, doesn't it? And
yeah,
navigating that is difficult, also.
yeah. It's like there can be such a thing as a respectful ending. And that's actually what I do with some of my couples now. And that's a service that I've gotten trained in and I offer, is what's called discernment counseling, and then like conscious uncoupling, right? And so being able to say, like, there's a respectful and loving way to transition out of a relationship that honors, it's not this binary of like, you have to hate your ex now that you've divorced them or that you've separated. And I think there's a lot of maybe that messaging out there that either you're meant to be and you're together forever, or you're over and they were a terrible person, and it's like, well, no, there's actually like a respectful way that you can end a relationship that honors what you got out of it, and also honors that, like, you're going to another chapter.
Yeah, I think from my experience, we're awful at that doing it well. And
Yeah.
everybody just waits for something to go wrong or creates something bad to make it happen, and it always seems to go
Yeah,
badly.
yeah, it's not the healthiest.
No, not at all. What's a common fear or insecurity then that people seem to struggle with in relationships, but rarely admit?
That how hard asking for what you need is. I think a lot of people are like, that's a part of the thing, right? It's like being vulnerable is asking for what you need and trusting that your partner cares enough about you to try to meet your need, or at least acknowledge that you have a need. Um, and I see a lot of people who struggle to even acknowledge that they have needs, or they're like, no, no, I'm not the needy one in this relationship. And they're like, well, if you're human, you have needs. So, but it is kind of difficult sometimes to get to that place where you can ask for what you need, and you believe that your partner cares enough about you and your well-being that they actually want to help meet your need, or that they'll at least acknowledge it. Like, that's a pretty tough place that I see people struggle with a lot, and it's scary.
Yeah, I get that. From the other perspective, then, from the other partner's point of view, how do they create that space to make it okay for the partner to do that?
Yeah, and that's where being really patient, really doing a lot of active listening, and also, you know, one of the things that sometimes comes up when somebody is trying to express a need they have is sometimes it comes out as, maybe projection or an attack on the other person. And so being boundaried and self-aware enough to ask them to restate without attacking back. Does that make sense? So like if I'm asking one person to be like, can you state what you need? And they might say something like, well, you never asked me how my day was. And so then the other person's job is, rather than responding to that of like, what are you saying? I just asked you yesterday, is being patient enough and aware enough to say, okay, can you tell me what your need is under that? And then it really bounces the ball back to, well, you never asked me, and that hurts my feelings because I want to be asked. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? And so participating in the cycle of health rather than the cycle of harm to the relationship is where the other person comes in, right? It's like you can shoot them right back into that conflict cycle by matching that energy, or you can hold and pause and give them the opportunity to restate it. And that's really where, like, then the growth happens.
Yeah, that's the difference between listening to understand and listening to just respond, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's about asking those extra questions and getting into the detail of it
Mhm.
and figuring out actually what are they really saying. Because sometimes you'll say something and you haven't actually got to the root of it really.
Yeah. And that's so common, um, which, yeah, keeps a lot of people stuck in that cycle, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. What about technology then in modern relationships? How does that kind of influence and impact people?
Um, it is a blessing and a curse, right? It's like it just depends on how it's used. I've seen a lot of couples that would have never been able to keep as in touch as they do without the use of technology, right? It's like if they're long distance or, they have periods of time where they have to be apart or travel, and like using technology as a way to stay connected, even deepen intimacy by, doing things over, using technology is like, it's a way that it can be very, very bonding. And then, of course, it could just be a third or fourth partner in the home that gets in the way of everything. you know, it's like, it's, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. It's just really important that couples um, are mindful of their own relationship to technology, right? Yeah.
Yes. Again, it comes down to balance, right? It's getting the balance right. It can be a great tool, but it can also be really, really negative. Is there any
Yeah.
kind of piece of advice that you would give to couples who are trying to kind of, you know, who want to use that technology but kind of want to get the balance right about, getting that deeper connection as well?
I, you know, Honestly, what's worked for a lot of couples is, at least creating tech-free zones in your house, whether those are time zones or certain rooms that are tech-free, and trying to have some balance in that way, right? Like we can't always just, you know, turn our phones off at 5 o'clock when the workday ends. But, having at least some kind of boundary around like, I don't know, after 6 o'clock or after 7 o'clock, we have an hour where we just have tech-free time for a little bit. We just have dinner together, we just connect, and then we pick our phones back up at 8, or we watch a movie. Like again, we can have technology in our lives, but having these like little tech-free zones has been very helpful for a lot of couples to try to find that balance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. To be fair, I'm terrible at it. I'll just sit on my phone and scroll and go down the rabbit hole for forever. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, the apps are designed for that, right? They're good at it. They're good at keeping you on.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
But we spoke briefly at the start about how gender roles have kind of changed and how the balance of stuff is off. A term I hear a lot. when I'm doing all my TikTok rabbit hole falling down, is toxic masculinity. What's your view on that?
I think it's a term that has completely taken a life of its own and derailed a very important conversation about allowing or making space for the evolution of masculinity to not be so rigid and restricted. I don't really like the word. I don't like the phrase toxic masculinity because I feel like it just derails from the point. But I like what Tony Porter, he talks about this concept of like the man box, which he talks about like restrictive masculinity, of masculinity as like following a certain set of rules. If you complete this checklist, if you stay within these parameters, then congratulations, you have your man card. But it's so fragile because at any moment, oh, is that nail polish? Sorry, man card removed. Or oh, did you just show an emotion? What? Man card removed. And so that kind of restrictive masculinity, like, you know, not allowing men to just be who they are and showing up as a full, full self and not have to be like performative in their masculinity, is I think where the really important conversation should be. By this phrase that's again very sticky on social media.
Oh, there you go. Sorry, my audio went, I think.
Yeah, mine
Yeah.
did too.
Yeah, I think something's going on. I can hear something.
Yeah.
Let me do that. Let's see if this. I don't know. There you go. That seems to be back now. Seems to be better.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah, toxic masculinity. It is thrown around a lot. It's one of those extremes that are used, and I think for me, I think this toxic behavior that people can, if they are behaving in extreme ways, but that could be on both ends. I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with, masculinity or femininity. It's just, some people take things too far, really.
Yeah, I think, again, with like, if we go back to the root of or what toxic is, it's the opposite of healthy, right? And so, I mean, it's poisonous, right? And so that's really where I think, being able to think about when we restrict people to certain sets of behavior and tie their identity to those rigid sets of behaviors, it is toxic to that person because it limits them from growing and being who they are, right? And that could be it could be toxic, I don't know, workplaces, right? Toxic, schools and environments and like, so, there's, I guess, in that sense, but I do think that the way it's used on TikTok is just like gone, it's gotten a whole life of its own. But that's why I like to go back to like, what did it actually stand for in the beginning? It was about the restriction of men to certain parameters and, not allowing them to be who they are and who they wanted to be, with the threat that, they would lose their man card if they were to be more just human.
Yeah, and I think there's this kind of view that if you're a man, you have to be masculine all the time. Whereas actually, there's scales. People are different anyway. So some people are more, some men are more feminine than others. Some men are more masculine than others. And even like me, for instance, I'll sometimes I can be masculine. Sometimes I can be quite feminine. Actually, it depends on. I let my daughter paint my nails and do whatever else. It doesn't bother me. I'm not fussed.
Yeah.
I have there's no problem with that. So I think, again, it comes to that balance and understanding that everybody has a bit of balance and they'll ebb and they'll flow and they'll go back and forth depending on the situation and what's appropriate, really.
Yeah. And it is really interesting because I think a lot of people, especially online, throw out like, well, what about toxic femininity? And it's like, yeah, there was toxic femininity. And then we had the feminist revolution, which said women don't want to be confined to those rigid boxes of femininity that restricted them to certain parameters. of like what it meant to be a female or a woman. And then like that's where I think that's part of the, again, sometimes things get lost in the messaging, right? But like absolutely, there was a feminine component that was where women were very rigidly defined to certain feminine stereotypes. Like women couldn't wear pants, right? Women, if a woman decided to cut her hair short, like, burn her at the stake. And so again, these kinds of things that we decided were female or male or feminine or masculine, and like if people deviated from those rigid boxes, we would punish them. It's like, yeah, that happened for women a lot a long time ago, and then that's what women have been fighting for, is like the freedom to express themselves in their femininity in whatever way they choose. Like if you wear pants and have short hair and have different, like whatever, like you're still a woman, that doesn't change, right? And same thing as a man, like you are a man and you can express your masculine, you can express other aspects of what might be perceived as more feminine. It doesn't change the fact that you are a man, and that's your held identity. And you can inhabit that in any way you choose. It doesn't make you any less of a man. Whereas in the past it was like, well, that would make you less of a woman, or that would make you less of a man. You're not a real man, you're not a real woman. Real women do blank, real men do blank. And it's like, well, or we can just say people are on a spectrum, and like every human is different and unique. And
Yeah, I think it comes down to it's human nature that we want to put everybody in a kind of a category or a box, so we can kind of we know that person belongs there, that person belongs there. We could just understand, I don't know if that's like a evolutionary thing from from groups and stuff, so we could kind of understand and categorize things and make things easier. But I mean,
oh
it
my
doesn't work
gosh.
in modern society. There's so much balance and nuance needed now.
Well, I will definitely say that's an adaptation of our brains, right? Patterns, our brains are in like major, I put this in my book, like our brains are giant pattern seeking machines. That's how our brains work. It looks for patterns so that it can waste less energy, right? When we are met with something unfamiliar, it takes our brains more energy to figure out what is this. The minute we can say, oh, that goes in this box, the next time we see it, it goes in that box. And it saves our brain energy. That's the only reason why our brains want to do that, is save energy. So pattern seeking, categorization is like kind of baseline what our brains are designed to do. Data consumption, pattern seeking, organization, um, and yet that's not how life is. I mean, again, for an evolutionary strategy, for if every time we saw a snake, our brain would go, what kind of snake is this? Is this friend? Instead, our brain is just like, snake, run. We'll figure out if it's a cute one or a bad one later, but like for now, let's just activate the danger response, right? And so that's a very interesting and complicated aspect of like the nature piece, and how it shows up in what we do to people and how we view our world and how we inhabit, our experiences. Is, yeah, you're right. We do want to put things in boxes, and figuring out the balance of when is it adaptive and when does it get in our own way.
Yeah, and it makes sense because when we're early on in our evolution and stuff, we would have had smaller groups. Even up until recently, really, when we've now become globally interconnected, and there's a massive, huge society, really global society that's all connected and communicating and interacting. Now it's much more complex, and our brains are not quite there. So we have to be aware
Yeah,
that our default state is to put people into boxes and categorize things, and then
yeah.
actually take a step back and think, oh, but, and then try and consider the
Hmm.
nuance and the actual, real issues that are at play.
Hmm. Yeah, our brains are working hard these days. Everyone's a little overwhelmed.
I'm not sure. I think mine's hardly working, to be honest. So you mentioned your book briefly. Tell me a little bit about your book. What was the experience like of writing it first?
I mean, it's a lot of work to write a book. It it took about 3 years. Um, but yeah, I wanted to write a book that I noticed. So I've been doing couples therapy since 2014. And so what I would notice is that there was kind of a consistent pattern again. My brain started to, wait a minute, is there a pattern here? And maybe I could be more efficient in addressing the pattern, which is there were a lot of men who were coming into therapy very eager and ready to change and saying like, I want to know how to like meet my wife's needs. Know I understand that like something needs to change. I'm not happy. She's not happy. I'm ready to do the work. Like, let's figure this out. Um, but a lot of the self-help, mental health, relational resources and books were just directed to women. Like, there's just an abundance of resources for women, and there just weren't as many for men. And so that was something I started to notice after a while. Is like I was struggling to find resources for men. Um, and so that's part of what I wanted to put into this book is like, it's called Strong, a Relationship Field Guide for the Modern Man, because it's like, I wanted it to be skills-based, practical, kind of use it as a field guide to a relationship. Because that's what I found that a lot of men, they're like, I just want the tool so I can learn it, so I can practice it, so I can implement it, so that I can see change in my life and in my relationship. Like give me the skills guide. And there wasn't really anything out there that I could immediately offer them. So I wrote it.
Yeah, it's typical us men, really. We want a manual. We want an instruction guide how to put something together.
Sorry, will you repeat that?
Yeah, I was just saying, it's typical of us men, really. We want a little instruction manual of how to put something together, same as like flat back furniture. How do we put it together? Let's look at this. I'll sort it.
Yeah. But that's again, like I wanted to, I think therapy can sometimes be seen, and that's part of what I've heard from a lot of male clients of like, oh, it's just going to be this like emotional, nebulous, like get into your feelings process. And it's like, how is that useful? And like, I know as a therapist that yes, getting into your emotions and sometimes just feeling your feelings is very useful. And also, sometimes we just need to make action and make tangible change and start to, put things into gear to make some progress. Um, so, and again, there are lots of stuff out there for the like maybe process type approach. And I wanted to honor the other piece of the more practical approach.
Yeah, I think there's some value in that as well, in some, in actually seeing some progress, because then you get
Yeah,
more buy-in and you get, you're more invested in it. You think, oh, this is working. And then even if it goes on
100%.
to the other softer skills, then at least,
Yeah.
you've seen some progress, you believe in it, and that's half the battle, really.
Totally, totally. And I like to think about it as like it's eventually going to work together. It's like the structure is like the the practical, like what is the structure? How do we have these conversations? How do we tackle this? And then the experience of like, what does it feel like to be connected? They're both really important in a long-term relationship. And I like sometimes I'm like, it's like the structure of the house and then the furniture. It's like, but if you spend too much time picking out the couch before you bought the house, like you're kind of like not, like you said, not really bought in because you're like, why am I spending so much time talking about the colors of the couch? Like we don't even have a house yet. Like we don't even have the structure built. Like let's do that first, and then I'll be more invested in like talking about the colors of the couch, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And like I say, a lot of the books can be difficult if there's a lot of soft skills. A lot of
Yeah,
men will struggle with that. Like I would probably struggle with that as well until I have some sort of traction or momentum, and then at which point I'm invested then, and I'll go down that
exactly.
road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what are some of the key lessons then out of the book that that is strong a model? Is that
It is. Yeah. So STRONG is an acronym, and here's my book. Yay. Um, so STRONG is an acronym because I wanted something kind of easy to remember. It's like a blueprint, right? So when I was thinking also about like healthy relationships, what does that mean? Like it's a big, broad term, and um, I'm sure there are a lot of people that have different opinions about what does that mean? What is a good relationship? And I just wanted to say, like, well, hold on. What are the essential elements when it comes to healthy, right? Healthy relationship. And so that's really where it's like, well, strong is healthy when it comes to a physical sense, right? It's like we don't have to have a certain goal weight or, what my body looks like in a whatever photo shoot. But if you're strong, like that's functional, that's capable, right? And it's generally a marker of health when you can have certain level of strength, right? And again, it's different for everyone, but um, so strong is the acronym. And these are the kind of essential elements that I've seen, both in my practice and then also in doing all the research for this book of the consistent elements that are present in healthy relationships. So the first thing is healthy relationships are safe relationships where people feel emotionally safe to be honest. They can have difficult conversations. They can self-regulate when they're getting upset. And they also have that self-awareness, which makes them safe partners because they know they're not going to wake up one day and be like, oh, I never wanted this, and run away and buy a Porsche and do all those, things. So self-awareness, stability, basic stability, right? In order to have a healthy relationship, having a certain level of functioning is also really important. And then self-regulation skills of being able to have conflict in a respectful and safe way without like darts at your partner. And then self-expression, right? How can you have even a difficult conversation in a way that you can express yourself where it's safe and respectful and you feel heard and all of that. So safety is huge. That's the foundation. And then trust. All healthy relationships have a stable foundation of trust. Also, R is for respect because all healthy relationships have an element where the partners really respect each other. They might not agree with each other in that moment or all the time, but they still respect that their partner has a lot to offer. The other thing that respect does is respecting boundaries, that even though you're in a relationship, you can still acknowledge that your partner is their own person and has their own boundaries. And that's really a marker of health in a relationship because otherwise, when there are no boundaries, people become kind of codependent, right? And that's where it becomes very unhealthy. Or when people don't respect each other in a relationship, obviously it causes a lot of conflict and they start operating independently, right? Where then it becomes a power struggle of like, I'm better than you, so you should listen to me. And then it becomes a, don't you tell me what to do. And, you're not the boss of me. And that's where I've seen a lot of conflict happen is lack of respect in relationships. So having safety, trust, and respect are really kind of the foundational elements of what it means to have a healthy relationship. Yeah. And then once we get that down, the ONG piece is really about thriving and the long-term success of a healthy relationship is O is for openness, kind of acknowledging like what you said is the person that you marry is not going to be necessarily the person that you retire with or the person that, you end your life with. You have to be open to the changes that you're going to make and that your partner is going to make and building that in and not seeing the changes as threatening to the relationship, but building a structure that like you're going to continue to grow, I'm going to continue to grow. We can be open with each other about the changes that we're going to continue to make throughout our lives, right? And then N is nurturing, the idea that like we're both responsible for nurturing this relationship. Like, how do you want to nurture it? What are the skills that you want to bring? And then what are the skills that I have to nurture this relationship? And together, we're both in charge of keeping this thing alive, right? Like, I might take it out in the sun like a little plant, right? And you might be the one that waters it and takes it to the vet. I don't know. Plants don't go to the vet, but you know what I mean? Like treating the relationship like a living thing that we're both invested in and we both nurture is also present in healthy relationships, right? We're both invested in keeping this thing alive and we both think about ways to invest in it and nurture it. And then G is generosity, which is just that kind of like that in healthy relationships, people are beyond just the like, all right, you know, we're compatible, we're doing well, like tit for tat. It's really that like little like fairy dust of like they actively look for ways to make their partner's life better. And that's really what sets like great relationships apart from just good ones is that level of generosity where they're like, I just saw something that reminded me of my partner and I just wanted to like take that moment because I knew it would make their day, and just send it to them or take a picture of it and, say I'm thinking about you. And just those little moments of generosity are the like real, just like the most like kind of cherry on top marker of a healthy relationship is like not only safe, You not only trust each other, you respect each other, you're open with each other, you're both invested in nurturing the relationship, and you go out of your way to like be generous with like, I like that person. I want to make their day better. What can I do to be generous? Yeah, so that's strong.
I love that. That's really, really well put together. I quite, I buy into everything you've said there, and it's some of the stuff that we've touched on already. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. And I, again, like everybody can adapt it in their own way in their own lives, but just from the research and from the clinical kind of perspective is like it also it helps with couples of like where sometimes when they come in they're in crisis and they're like where's our disconnect, like what do we even need to work on. A lot of people come in and they're like we just have communication issues, but when I break it down it's like maybe it's the lack of respect and like maybe the communication is breaking down because like when one person is setting a boundary the other person is not hearing it, right? Or maybe it's the trust thing, is that maybe you are communicating something but maybe you're not communicating fully and honestly, so then you're not showing up that in a way that your partner can trust you. Like I said I'd be home late, well yeah, you're like 3 hours late, I thought you would be 5 minutes late, and so having that like it could be communication, but what is the communication about, right? Is it that maybe then it's the nurturing thing of like, I feel like I'm investing a lot and I'm not getting the same from you. Everything else, like I feel respected, I feel like I can trust you, but I need more investment from you. Great. And so that's also where, for me as a clinician, it's helpful to help people map against like, you know, if we're having communication issues, what is it about? What is on the deeper kind of core of that communication issue? Yeah.
yeah, I like that, and it comes back to that self-awareness that you said at the beginning as well, is being aware of how you're communicating, what you're doing in the relationship, because we're too quick, I think, to look at the other person and kind of blame the other person for what they're doing or what they're not doing,
Hmm.
when we
Yeah.
haven't really got our own ducks in a row.
Yeah. Absolutely. Relationships are much easier when both people are self-aware. I'll say that.
How do you help the people that are not? How do you help them kind of get to that point?
Well, and again, this is where I just highlight that, look, this will be easier if you can tell your partner something that I guess I put it the opposite way in the book, is like when you don't when you don't know something about yourself, you can't tell your partner what you need. And so I always just kind of bring it back to like, I want you to get your needs met. Clearly, like if there's conflict and ongoing like clashes, people are not happy, right? That's not a sign of happiness and health, right? There's something that's not working. But I can't help you get there if you can't tell me what it is that's not working for you, right? And so that's part of why I highlight that like, even as a couples therapist, I have limitations. And so sometimes that's where I'll refer people to individual therapists of like, I want to help you get to a level of functioning that makes you happy in this relationship. But if you don't know what you need, like that's the first step. Like you can't tell your partner what you don't know about yourself. You can't ask for what you don't know or don't acknowledge that you need. So give yourself at least some time and space to figure out like what would make you happy? What are you looking for? You know, what's something that you would like to have in a relationship that would make your experience better? Um, and once you can kind of get some of that, and then it becomes easier to have a better relationship because you at least know what it is you're looking for or what you want. Right?
Yeah, that's massive, right? Getting that figured out, and we all
Yeah,
struggle with that, I think. And it's not just relationships; it's life. I think we struggle to figure out what we want and put it all together.
yeah, yeah. But some people, again, like don't even know that that's a question they can ask themselves. Does that make sense? And so that's where I think, yeah,
Yeah, we're too busy looking out and looking at everybody else and everything else rather than looking in and trying to figure ourselves out first. And then, because I think
hmm,
if we get ourselves right, or we have that self awareness, like you say, I think just approaching life will so much easier.
yeah, it is. It makes a huge difference.
Cool. Where can people find you, Crystal, if they want to get in touch with you or if they want to get hold of your book?
You can find me online at strong.love. That's my website. My book is on Amazon, and you can find me on Instagram at ATXTherapist.
No problem. I'll make sure I drop the links in the show notes for people so they can find you.
Thank
Before
you.
we bring this to a close, is there any final thoughts or anything that you want to leave us with?
I just, let's think. I always like to leave with hope. Is that I know there's a lot of confusion right now, and there's a lot of noise out there, and it can feel like overwhelming and like you don't even know where to start. But I think just like, people like you, and there are a lot of people that are like these little points of hope, and that, if you're out there and listening, or you're kind of wondering, like, where do I even go to start working on myself, or to start being a healthier person mentally, physically, emotionally, have hope, because there are little points of light out there that are looking to help guide you. And, there is help if you want it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. KrIstal, it's been amazing having you on the show. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's
No
fun.
problem. Take care.